Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a new panel with Jake Pushinsky and Kamali Minter. This is the Editors Roundtable. Thank you for coming and join us. Just to start, we want to make this very familiar, so if you could explain a little bit of your background, and then we open to questions and any discussion topic. Just feel free to pop it up and feel at home. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. So I started off, I guess, my filmmaking journey at NYU, where I went to Tisch, and they kind of give you an all-around training in a bunch of different things, and somehow I stumbled into post-production, where I have initially learned on Avid, and when I moved out here, I sort of detoured into acting for a little bit. And then started up my own production company, Lucent Rain Productions, when I got frustrated with the whole acting thing, and decided to do shorts, EPKs, web content. And so in order to keep my budgets low, I learned Final Cut and began editing a lot of the projects myself. And got really good with Final Cut. From there, that led me into a job with a production company called Authentic Entertainment. They do a lot of reality television. You might know them from like Toddlers and Tiaras as one of their flagship shows. And so over there, I kind of worked my way up through the ranks and cut a lot of their promotional sizzle reels and teasers and stuff, and got the show Flipping Out picked up by Bravo, and then ended up cutting on that for a year. And then just did a bunch of found my way through the reality world. And ended up cutting a lot of reality. So that's a lot of my editing experience and background is in reality, but I've also worked on several shorts over the years and some music videos and other types of web content and short form stuff. So,
I grew up as a jazz musician and got my start in the entertainment business working at a place doing music for television commercials. I was working closely with a guy who was writing a script at the time, and my father was a screenwriter, and my mother used to make her own documentaries, and so I would read his script and give him my thoughts, and we had the dream of someday making this movie, not knowing what I would do on it, but one day we went out and shot some stuff with some friends to make kind of a teaser trailer to go along with the script. And I cut that on Adobe Premiere. It was just some very basic version of Adobe Premiere at the time that we used to digitize the commercials that we were writing the music for at the company I worked for. And from my basic knowledge of that program, just kind of we digitized all the footage, and I threw together this little 7-minute short. And Robert Downey Jr. was actually really good friends with the owner of the company that I worked at, and he would come in all the time, so we gave him the script and the short. He absolutely loved it, took it to Trudy Styler, Sting's wife. She loved him, and 6 years later, they made the movie with my friend directing. He tried his hardest to get me on to edit, but I had only cut this one short, so there was no way they were going to hire me. But they hired another editor. 2 weeks into filming, producers walked in to see stuff. Director walked in. They hated everything. He said, "One more time, please bring my friend out and let him try to do it." And they brought me out, and I ended up cutting that movie. And that was the first time I had ever sat down at Avid, and it was at Sundance, and things went from there, and now it's 7 years later and a bunch of movies later. So, A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, any questions?
yeah, it's good.
No, I grew up using Macs, and it was on a Mac. They had it on a Mac. I was really lucky to the assistant editor that was working with the editor that was on before me stayed on. They let him go and brought me on, and that assistant editor stayed on, and he was an avid tech. We were out in New York. He was an avid tech while going to NYU, so he knew it in and out. And I showed up, and I said, look, I don't know what any of this means, but I know what I want to do. I'll be able to say I want to do this and do that. And so he sat with me for probably the first couple of days, because I had used Premiere, so I knew the basics of edit. I knew how to edit. I just didn't know the controls that I was looking for. And I would say within the first week, I knew my basics. I made a lot of happy accidents in that movie because I didn't know what I was doing, and things on the timeline that shouldn't have been there that ended up in the final cut because it looked good. But yeah, it took me a week or so, and now I'm predominantly avid. But if a project needs to be on final cut, I'll do it. This movie, I met the director in '97. We made the first short in '99, and then we were making the movie in 2005. So I had lived with this movie for 8 years, and it was based on his life, and we had become really good friends. So I really knew this story and knew this movie. And not knowing what I was really doing, I would look at dailies and just start putting things together in a way that I thought it made sense. The assistant editor at one point watched a scene that I cut and said, "You can't do that." And I really didn't. I had no idea. I was like, "What do you mean I can't do it? The scene works." He said, "But you're crossing the line," and I really didn't know what he meant. He later told me that when he was first watching the dailies, he was like, "I don't know how you'll edit this," because he could tell that the DP hadn't shot coverage correctly. But yeah, so I had seen the scenes that he did. I didn't let it affect me. It didn't. So the writing on the screen, that was something I did in the original short that we did, because he had. It's very loosely based on his real life, but the one of the characters, Antonio, was his good friend who went to jail, and he actually was in jail. And we would sit in our office. We worked in a room, the size of 4 of these chairs together for 4 or 5 years. But his good friend Antonio was in jail, and he would collect to our office all the time, and he would record the phone calls all the time. So we had these recordings of the calls from jail, and in the short, we opened it. We loved the sound of the real guy's voice was incredible, and that sound over the phone on a tape recorder it sounds so great, but you really couldn't completely understand him. But we wanted to use it, and I thought, well, we'll just put the transcription up. And in a movie, it looks like screenplay, but it's really just transcription. I just formatted it to look like a screenplay. And so it was in the original short, and then he wrote it into the script. So that just kind of came out of nowhere. But we didn't really do any formal test screenings. We showed it to groups of friends and family, and we definitely got a lot of positive response from both of those scenes. The other scene on the train, the director was filming the scene, and it's a very basic scene. The guy walks in script form. The guy walks onto a train. He sees somebody from school. "Hey, we go to school together. Nice to meet you. I'm so-and-so. You're so-and-so. We're going on a train together." And when he was filming it, he just was like, this nothing special here. Nothing's happening. So he had the 2 actors just come to the sound man and just record the dialogue, just dialogue only, in a very kind of monotone, soft way, having no idea what he was going to do with it. He was just like, I'm just going to do things. He had never directed anything either, so he just would try things on set with hopes that maybe it would do something. And I got it, and I started to cut it, and in that same scene, they're following the dirt spot on the train. The dirt spot in the window of the train. So that was also, we had shot a day in LA for that original short, and I was going to New York to visit a friend a couple of months, or it was about a month later. It was during the winter. And I brought, it wasn't a Bolex, but it was a little 8mm camera. And he had that in the original script where they're looking at the dirt spot in the window. And I shot that for the short. And so then he wrote it into the script as a more descriptive thing. But I just kind of, I mean, it's hard to even remember how I came up with that. But that scene, the first cut I did, that was the second scene I cut in that movie. And that scene never changed from my first cut that was my original cut, exactly as you see it, with the two types of talking. And my thought going in was to try to have them try to forget if I'm watching reality, if I'm hearing reality, am I watching something, kind of throwing in the idea of like, are the voices that I hear that I'm not seeing some real conversation that I'm not seeing? And I don't know, I like to think of, filmmaking as an art and try not to forget that and have fun with things and make art out of things as long as possible until somebody tells me I can't.
I would say, if I could talk to myself years ago, there's a couple of different approaches you can take. One of them is to look at where a lot of the work lives. And especially starting out, there's two different spaces. Like, if you're going into the production company route, most of the work that's easiest to get is going to be in the reality realm. There's just more opportunities to start off as an assistant editor and start logging or doing stuff like that, and then getting a shot to cut stuff that works your way up into editor position. That's great if it's just about getting work, or if it's just about getting the experience, or you're actually really interested in reality. The other side of it is that there's such separate worlds, like that versus like film. And so if you're really passionate about like film and documentary and all that, like stock film festivals and stock filmmakers, and collaborate with people on a small basis, like doing short form stuff for the web, YouTube, that kind of thing. And it's most about practice and putting your stuff in places where people can see it and letting people know this is what I do. Because people are always looking for editors. It's like one of the all the time I'm like, I don't have time. Most of the time they don't have money, but there's no shortage of work for editors. Paid work, another story. But once you get a reel going and you have, some experience, it's a lot easier to get paid for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it's really getting your name out there and surrounding yourself with people that you think want to make the same type of, or do the same type of work that you want to do. I mean, that's because some of it, I mean, it's a strange job in this world, because you look at a movie and, like you said, that you thought the editing was great and the guy directing your scenes. For all you know, the director was sitting behind me saying, I want from that frame to that frame, that frame to that frame. So unless you start meeting filmmakers, there's no way for them to really know who did the work. I mean, you kind of hope that you're recognized when you do something, but you never know. I mean, and going to film festivals and surrounding yourself with and introducing yourself to the people that you want to work with is really, and then consistently doing things that you can say you're proud of. I mean, I've been lucky enough to, I've said yes to very few jobs that I didn't creatively want to work on. I've been lucky to fall into jobs that I've wanted to work on often enough to keep me financially going. So I can kind of say, watch anything I've done and you'll see what I do.
I find myself actually having to be trilingual these days because of what's happening in editing software. It used to be just Avid. Avid was the professional tool. And then Final Cut came along, and it was Final Cut and Avid. And a lot of the independent production companies were going Final Cut because it was cheaper. So a lot of my work has actually been on Final Cut, and recently, because Final Cut went to Final Cut 10, which is a completely different approach to editing. You have to relearn it as a new language. Final Cut's getting dropped from production companies everywhere, and it's becoming kind of obsolete in that professional sense. So Avid now is, once again, the forerunner, but Premiere is coming up in the rear. So, you know, a lot of there's a handful of indie filmmakers now that are turning to Premiere because Adobe's providing a solution where you can integrate between After Effects and Photoshop and Premiere, and it's actually really awesome and powerful as a tool if you're working just as a solo editor. So I've taken it upon myself to actually stay current with these 3 major platforms, and I get a lot of my updates through a friend of mine who likes reading tech blogs, because I don't. But I find if you have like 1 or 2 tech-savvy friends who enjoy keeping up on that information, and you just have conversations with them regularly, they'll keep you abreast of like what you really need to know. And then when I'm taking in new information, like everything is online, tutorials, all kinds of things, and usually if I spend a day or 2 just ingesting a tutorial around a new piece of software, I can get my hands around it enough to use it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really, I mean, it's a strange time right now. I'm sure this stuff happens all the time with everything, but it's even beyond just the software that, you know, I started on Avid, but there was a job that came up and it was already set up on Final Cut, and I hadn't used Final Cut, but I didn't want to say no to the job, so I had to figure it out. But then in addition to that now is more and more productions in the feature world are expecting the cut that's coming out of the editing room to be a finished product. I mean, they want to see it as close to color corrected as possible, as close to mixed as possible. And you get into the smaller indies. Right now I'm working on a movie, and they don't want to pay an assistant editor, so it's me, and they still want all of it. The producers want to show up and see a movie. They don't understand an unfinished movie, so they want to see it as close to that as possible. So it's beyond just being up on the technology. It's being up on the skills of other, you know, what used to be other hires. Yeah, and it, you know, I mean, I have a huge library of sound effects, and I mean, I grew up, like I said, I started as a jazz musician, so, and when I was doing music for television commercials, I ended up becoming the in-house music editor, so I have a big library of music and music editing. I know, so that part, I'm always thinking about music, so that part, I always temp out everything I do, but now it's becoming expected, and they're cutting our times back, and they want a lot to happen in a small amount of time, and so it's beyond just making sure you know the software. You know, it's just adding temp music in and cutting it so that it actually works for the scene, you know, and making a piece of score from another movie work as score for this movie. And, you know, it might be 5 minutes long and the scene's a minute long, but the music sounds right, and making sure that it works. And, you know, with action scenes, that's not a quick little 5-minute job. So. And
in reality, it's not even temp. It's what goes to air.
Yeah. it's final product.
Yes and no. I've used someone else's subscription. I'm about to get my own. I think more and more stuff is actually going to become subscription-based. Like, you're seeing it already with DropCloud and Evernote and Spotify, and like that's just the direction I think we're moving in, because people want that flexibility of like, I don't want to pay $500 every time I have to upgrade to a new version of a piece of software. So the nice thing about the subscription-based software is that you can shut your subscription off. So if you're not working for like a month or 2, or you don't have a project going on, you don't have to pay for it that month, you know? And you just, everything gets saved. Like, you can save your settings, or I think you can download stuff so that it doesn't all disappear. But that way you're really kind of only paying for the software or the service as you need it, and hopefully you're getting paid for using it. Yeah, that's Adobe. So they put all their software in the cloud, and it's a subscription base. So you subscribe to it, and you download. Still, you install it on your hard drive locally, like you would with normal software. but then it backs up like your settings and all that stuff to the cloud, and yeah, everything's in the cloud. Yes. No, but you can. They do offer that. I think it's like an additional fee where you can back up project files and that kind of stuff too. They offer like a cloud service like that, so you can share footage and all that stuff. I haven't edited with anything off of the cloud yet. I've only like seen how it works. So yeah, I couldn't tell you whether there's like latency or anything. I mean, personally, I think Adobe is actually one of the post companies on the cutting edge, like in the editing world. Even though they're not widely recognized yet in the way that Avid or Final Cut has been, I think the way that they're innovating and have been innovating over the last couple of years, they're the ones to watch. I think they really listen to their consumer base, and you can see the changes get implemented in every version. And yeah, they're kind of killing it in a lot of ways. Just. Yeah, that's the other thing. Avid's in financial trouble. Yeah, reality's sneaky because it pays well. And yes, like once you do a show, you get to know the post soups, you get to know, show runners, and yeah, they keep working and they keep calling you for work. So, and then it becomes hard to turn it down. But I would say it's possible to run like parallel games, if you keep. What I like to do is I will usually do 2 to 3 shows a year. So, most shows will run for 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes much longer, depending on whether you're cutting 1 episode or 2 episodes. So I'll do 2 to 3 shows and leave myself like chunks of like a month or 2 months in between jobs to do other stuff, and to try to stay involved with projects and things that really feed me and keep me, more aligned with what my creative wheelhouse is.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't feel like I do this as much, but I know plenty of editors and definitely directors who look at a reel and see it doesn't even have to be the difference between reality and feature narratives. It could be TV and feature narratives. It could be comedies and dramas. I feel like if you can edit, you can edit. And obviously, I mean, I think comedy is the one place. Comedy and horror, really, there are probably some tricks to be learned, and you could, if you've done them more than somebody else, you may be faster. I've never done either one of those really, so it's hard for me to really say. But yeah, I mean, you get pigeonholed for sure. I mean, I would love to cut commercials in between every movie I've done, but commercial people say, well, you haven't done commercials. And, it's like, yeah, but I hadn't done movies either, but now I do. So but, again, it goes to that thing of put yourself around those people, and you meet a director who's doing a short, and, yeah, they may not have money, but you do that short for them. If that short turns into a feature, you hope that you're carried along. And that's kind of, but yeah, it's tough. I mean, I know a good friend of mine is an editor who's been in the business for a very long time, and early on in his career, he did a few comedies, and he does comedies, and he hates it. So, he'd love to do, and if he wants to do, and he's done he's done some big comedies, and in order to do anything that's not a comedy, he has to do smaller independents, and not. I mean, I have done plenty of small independents, so I don't think there's a problem with that. But financially, there's a big difference. So. On the bigger shows, who do you think is really pulling you on it? The production company, the producers, the directors themselves. I mean, that relationship. Who's really throwing your name? To me, I mean, I've always been hired by the director. I think on everything I've done. When you get into the bigger studio world, the studio has a definite say, and the director may have to fight harder. But if the director really wants you, they can get you. They can make it happen. I mean, Yeah, the director can make it happen, because if they want the director bad enough, they're going to make the movie, and so.
Yeah, I mean, that happens in reality all the time. Because, yeah, we're diving into episode 1 while they're still in the field usually. And there are huge benefits to that, of course. It's like, it's particularly necessary with reality because it's so much of it revolves around interview bites. And those interview bites more and more have to get specifically scripted to however an episode gets shaped or whatever. So the ability to go back out in the field and ask things that will help clarify a scene or make something work better just sometimes is the difference between being able to use something and not. And I'm trying to think about the downside to that is that I feel like things change more. Like you're constantly trying things and then undoing them and trying new things in that way. If there is a downside, where it's like, you know, you'll start with you'll see a certain amount of your footage that's there to use, and then you have to imagine the rest. You kind of have to imagine where it's going to go or where you would like it to go, and plug the holes with slugs or text or something, and then go out and get that stuff. And then maybe what you get is not exactly what you anticipated getting, so then you have to like switch some stuff around to make it all work. So I think it's a more fluid process that way. And I definitely have realized when I do projects like that, there's way more versions. But at the same time, you have that's almost a liberty to be able to do that. So yeah, freedom. Yeah.
On features, I push to be on as early as possible. I mean, if I can be on in pre-production, that's great. If I can be on as early as possible, I like to read scripts as soon as I'm involved. And then beyond that, if I can be cutting close enough to where you're shooting so I can actually be on set as much as possible, I think it's great. You know, I've been lucky enough to work with directors who have valued my opinion and thoughts. So being on set can be helpful. I think it's crazy if they don't want to hear an editor's thoughts, but sometimes they don't. But going back to the scheduling thing, I mean, obviously, if financially you can shoot stuff, edit, that's great. I mean, when you get into even smaller independents of $1 million and you have real actors and it gets into schedules and being able to bring those actors back, it gets difficult. You know, if you have a character in a movie for 5 days, chances are that actor is going to want to shoot those 5 days consecutively as opposed to, you know, over 5 months. I did work on one of the paranormals for a little bit, Paranormal Activities, and they do that because it's so cheap for them to shoot. They'll shoot a full script, go cut the whole thing, do a test screening, get rid of an hour and 20 minutes of the hour and a half, write a whole new hour and 20 minutes, go shoot that whole thing, and they'll do 5 or 6 times. It's a house, unknown actors, cheap cameras, no lights, no sound. I mean, they can afford to do that. So all you're paying is the editor. I mean, not completely, but everything else is very cheap when you're talking about a studio movie. And that's the dream way to make a movie. If you can just keep going back and shooting what you don't have. But again, that it's very costly if you're dealing with permits and sets and lights and actors and, you know, to be able to just go back and, you know, if you're shooting something with friends and everybody's doing it for free and everybody's on the same page about let's make this the best, great, but that's not always the case. I mean, I go back and forth. If there's a lot of improv in the acting, you know, too over the shoulders is great. Cinematographers don't want to hear about it because of the lighting, and as an editor, when I'm in there and watching dailies and there's multiple cameras, my head gets a little swimmy when there's too many cameras of the same thing. But the final product, I think, is always better. If you have multiple cameras, it's great. I mean, the more cameras, I mean, put 10 cameras in the room, you never know. Maybe that angle from up on the roof is going to look great. And if you can get away with it, sure.
Yeah, I think it's you always get the best stuff with multiple cameras because you catch each moment. When it does get to be too many cameras, it's the same thing. I get overwhelmed. I mean, you do the whole grouping and ganging and multi-clipping and all that, but sometimes it really is easier just to watch like one camera at a time and really see everything that's happening. And and then sometimes I'll actually, even when there's multiple cameras, I'll pick the best angle or whatever I think the strongest stuff is happening. I'll just cut around that, and then I'll bring in the second angle. Yeah, I was like, that's a tricky one because their challenges happen on so many different levels. There's personality conflicts. There's creative conflicts. There's budgetary conflicts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've really gotten along with most of the directors I've worked with that I can think of. I mean, I mean, if you want to be a director, you got to have something's wrong up there. So they have. It's to me, if you're, I think it's the worst job in the business. I would never want to do it. And if you can bring yourself, and I think it's the hardest job. I mean, it's really to walk onto a set every day and have anywhere from, depending on the size of the movie, 20 people to 100 people looking at you saying, what do you want me to do? And really having to have an opinion about every one of those things confidently is crazy. And you get into the editing room, and it's much different than being on set. And it is very collaborative, and I think it can be it can be great. It gets tiring. It's a lot of hours in a small room with one person. I've worked with team directors too, so then there's two. But I mean, the one thing that comes to my mind, a guy recognizing you're saying, there's one shot that I really didn't want to put in. He wanted it in. Of course, he wins that fight, and it still bothers me. But no, I mean, I think one of the reasons I am very happy as an editor and am okay with the fact that I am no longer a musician, because I grew up from age 6, I was going to be a jazz piano player, and that's what I was going to do. I realized that at a certain age, when I wrote a piece of music, that's what it was. Here's my piece of music. You don't like it, don't take it. You like it, great. That doesn't work. Financially, that doesn't work. People want changes. And with editing, I don't have that. I'm here to help the director get their vision across, and if the producers have more say than the director, then we're there to make their movie, whatever. I'm there to help somebody else make their movie. I definitely have my opinions and thoughts about what is better, and I definitely will voice them, but I know that if I want to make my movie, I need to go make my movie. I'm not there to make my movie. So there are a few things in every movie that I think could be better some other way, but that's the way it goes. Well, I did it once, and they were great. I mean, it was a movie called Howl, and the directors had been working together for years and years on documentaries. This was their first non-documentary, and they were like the nicest guys. They got along. I could tell they had figured out which one of them had the final say. So it never really came to one of them saying one thing, the other one saying another thing, and me trying to figure out what that meant. It always was pretty clear whose opinion mattered more in each situation. But it worked out.
You also work on set
With them, I was not on set. I was I didn't get to see that. So I don't know what it was like for them on set. But I'm guessing, I mean, everybody I've met that knows them talks about them as the nicest people in the business. I mean, they're great. So, I mean, I want to edit. I go as far as I can to say that I don't even do that stuff. I try to. I mean, I've done documentaries where they have no money, and I know that it's either going to get done or it's not going to get done, so then I have to take it on. But yeah, then then it's like, okay, well, it's going to take longer. It's going to end up, will it cost more? I don't know. But yeah, you have to have those conversations. But I try to do as little of that stuff as possible.
Yeah, same. I mean, in the production company world, it usually is. It's not an issue. There's people who do that. But on the independent projects that I've done, I just charge more. And let people know, like, here's what it's going to cost for me to do that. Do you really want to have me do it at this rate per hour, or do you want to have someone else do it for less? So. I do both. It really depends, like for something like transcoding and stuff like that, where it's like it's really based on how much footage there is and all that. Like I'll literally do like by the hour, by the day, or when it's more like piecemeal service providing. With everything else, it's usually like a weekly rate or a flat, that we'll negotiate based on after I've seen the footage and we've discussed the vision. Because I've screwed myself a couple of times by not doing that. But yeah.
I typically do weekly. I recently took a documentary with a flat rate and will never, ever do that again. I'm very happy with the final product, and I'm glad I did it. Financially, it was a big mistake. But I don't know if it would have been either do it or don't, and I'm glad I did it. So, for me, I think at this point, as early as I can be involved. I mean, I've done 2 documentaries, especially with documentaries. Like I will try to never do another documentary again that I'm not involved in from the beginning, because it's a mess. Too many people try to go out to make a documentary without having any idea of what they're doing and what they're getting involved in, and miss out on so much stuff. And I don't blame them. I mean, with documentaries, you don't know where you're going until you get into it. And you could be going to shoot a documentary on the person that made these chairs, and you end up finding out that actually the best thing to do is the documentary about the person who dyed the fabric red. And you could have 2 years of footage about the chair maker that's now worthless. And I don't blame people for that, but if you had an editor on early, you may have the 2 documentaries I've done, they missed crucial things that I feel like the earlier an editor's on, the better.
Yeah, I've found that it's like has a lot to do with how well the other filmmakers are, how strong they are with story, and knowing how to capture story in a way that's going to translate in post. Some people are really good at that, and other people aren't so good. So that makes a big difference.
Even with narratives, I mean, if I can be on set, I will chime in. I mean, from little things like, yes, I'm going to want an insert of the bottle of water, to, well, we're missing coverage on this, or there's a story point, or even little things like, okay, the guy's going to walk across the street, you have a car coming, and he's supposed to hesitate because the car's coming. I feel like we're going to just want to get him across the street. We're not going to want to take that time. So there's all of those things. But then, in the documentary world, for sure, it's the amount of times I hit spaces where it's like, I need somebody, I did a documentary about a football player, and he won his high school championship game, and they didn't talk to him afterwards. Like, there's never talk to him about winning the game. And it's like, and it's nowhere near as effective to get him 10 years later talking about the game as it would have been you saw him after the game, the camera, you were there, but you didn't talk to him about it. And so, I mean, you definitely, you become as much a writer if there's one job that you kind of take on as an editor, it is writer.
Yeah, and editing really is the final rewrite of any project. So particularly in stuff that's not scripted to begin with, like documentary or reality. So you really are making it up. Even if there was already like, this is what it's supposed to be, you're making it up. And because you're making it up all over again, you're like, in order to sell this, I'm going to need a reaction shot here. We're going to cheat this fight. So I'm going to have to lift audio from this. I'm going to need like an extra piece of audio that you're going to have to go out and record separately. And so, yeah, like you're literally like a puzzle figuring out, if I want to sell this, how do we get that to work? You're lucky if it's an 8-hour day. The average hours in reality is you're usually looking more at like a 10-hour day. Has become the standard, unfortunately. And sometimes that becomes a 14 or a 16-hour day. And really good managers and post-soups and showrunners know that like you lose somebody after 8 hours. You really do. It's a very mentally draining job, and I have a lot of friends who are editors who've burnt out. You know, like literally had nervous breakdowns. So, not kidding. So yeah. I personally have to get up from the computer every 2 hours, take a walk, stretch, do something, and yeah, I try to keep my days. When I'm working for myself, I make them 6-hour days if I can, and I'll actually add a day onto my week just so I don't have to go that long. But yeah, no more than 8.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely agree. When I started, I was very excited, and on A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, on my first movie, I started right after Labor Day. We finished the first week of December, so it was September, October. It was just over 3 months. I took 1 day off, and I worked minimum of 12 hours a day, minimum. But I was living in San Francisco at the time. We were working in New York, so I was out in New York. I had nothing else to do, and I was working on a movie. Like, I wake up, and what else do I want to do? I get to go do this. It was exciting. I would never do that again. It's insane. I mean, and it worked at the time because I had adrenaline and it was exciting, and I at times hate hearing myself say that because it should still be exciting, and it is. But I also know that I don't need to do that. Like I'm lucky to be able to say that, but at the time I was trying to prove that I could do it. And I genuinely was excited about it and wanted to, but now there's no rush for me. There might be a rush for somebody else, but if I can't get it done in time, then keep paying me. But I think that's, it's kind of an individual thing. There are days where I'll get in there and I'll stay for 15 hours because it's a creative thing. You can't really control that. There are always things you can do that aren't as creative as other things. You can go through the dailies and put markers on everything and not necessarily use your creative mind as much. But when it comes down to cutting a scene, I mean, that's a creative thing, and if it's just not working, then all you can do is go in there and try. I mean, there's that thing that writers say is just you have to sit down in the chair for a certain amount of hours a day in order to really make it happen, or else it's easy enough to just not ever do anything. And it's similar. I could wake up every morning and say, yeah, I just don't have it today. You can't do that. But there is only, you hit a place of like, whoa, where am I going? What's happening? Who's talking what? What's the direction of this? Whose point of view? And yeah, then there's no reason to push it. But then there's deadlines, and you got to show a producer something, and your days are going to be 20 hours long. So. I have done a couple of. I did a thing for Samsung that was, a little short form. I've done I've done music videos. I've done a couple of commercials. I mean, when I said I would love to do commercials, is movies are draining, and I absolutely love it, and I love being on them for a long amount of time, and really doing that in the final product is exciting, and the premiere and the whole thing, all of that, I absolutely love. But as soon as that's done, the thought of starting another one is exhausting. So doing short form in between is great, because it's all, like I said earlier, it's all editing. I mean, it's, editing a comedy, editing a music video, it's a different thing for sure, but it's still fun, and yeah, I like all of it. I mean, and commercials, financially, it's the dream. You want to see more hamburger, here's more hamburger.
I love short form. It's actually probably my preference. I wish it paid more. Particularly web series. Like, I love web series. They're this, like, having to tell a story in 10 minutes or less, and to me, they're just like the most rewarding in terms of getting to get really creative, but not having to be on something forever. And definitely, the longer that you're on a project, the more that your enthusiasm kind of dwindles. So short form's great for that, because you're constantly refreshing that creative button. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the creativity side of it, I mean, and that depends on, that could be a feature also, but these days with where the internet is going and where short form is going on the internet, I mean, I think the ability to do more creative stuff is just great. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I did a music video, that this Whole Foods parking lot thing, that, I mean, it was like 1 million views in a weekend. I mean, it was ridiculous. And seeing the response to that immediately was incredible. What's that? It's this friend of mine, DJ Dave. He, it was just this joke. He's a composer, and he goes to Whole Foods all the time. And one day went down to Whole Foods and almost got into a fight over a parking spot, and realized that he's a 38-year-old white man driving his Prius, and it's a little ridiculous that he almost got into a fight in the Whole Foods parking lot, and wrote this rap song about it. And he sent it to me, and I was like, we have to go shoot a video for it. And we shot the video, and yeah, it was a little.
Yeah, I write and direct also, and so I actually have dabbled a little bit. I probably know more than I've executed so far. But yeah, I had a web series, like a sci-fi web series, that I had to learn about link sharing and all that fun stuff. Link sharing, like, where you get your link posted on different people's pages and blogged about and all that. And yeah, so it's like, if you're going to live in the web series world, it's like you have to learn marketing. And I've done a little bit. I'm learning more, and I'm probably about to start doing some more. But yeah, otherwise, everything else is marketing is handled by other people with all the other projects I've worked on. So,
I mean, that's really all it comes down to, is taking, even if it's that I'll cut a scene and I'll dive into it and be on it for hours, and just making sure I don't even watch it back for the first time without at least taking a walk and coming back. Like, I think it's just that constant, just even that moment away from the screen to step away and watch. I mean, I'm at the movie I'm working on right now. We have a pretty good cut, and we'll go through and make changes, and then we'll watch the whole thing again, and we'll go through and make little changes, and we'll watch the whole thing again. And yeah, watching the whole thing again is like, okay, I know what's going to happen. But you have to step away, even if it's, again, going back to that creativity thing and taking those breaks, and you can't force it. Even if you have to take a day of not looking at anything so that you can come in with a fresh head, you have to do that, because that is your job. You can't get jaded in it, and you can't lose perspective. That's your job, is to not lose perspective, because you do have to look at it every day. You can tell the director to leave and come back with fresh eyes, but you have to figure out a way for yourself to not lose perspective. And it's hard, but I mean, to me, it really a walk around the block makes a big difference.
And I'll usually cut in passes. Like, I'll make a game of it. So I'll be like, this is my story pass. And so I'll cut for, like, story. And then I'll do, now this is my technical pass. And I'll cut for, like, all my cheats and making sure that everything looks the way I want it to look. And my cheats, I call them cheats, are like, if where I cover up mistakes or things or make it look like it was something that it's not. So, tricks of the eye, look over there. So I'll divide my scene work just up into different intentions, and for each of those passes, like, I'll step away and then come back and look, is it working for that pass, and then I'll come back and do specifically for something else, which, one, it keeps it interesting for me because, if I'm working on a scene for a whole day or 2 days, then at least I'm shifting what I'm focusing on in that scene, and it keeps it a little more fun and interesting.
I try to have at least, I have my 2 computer screens, a small monitor and a bigger monitor, and that's one thing I'll do is I won't look at the big monitor until I get to a certain place where I feel like, okay, I'm ready to sit back in a chair and watch this and see how it feels. And even just that, going to a movie screen is a whole different thing. Like, that's that, because then you see things that you didn't think you would see, and like you said, those close-ups look ridiculous sometimes or look incredible. But even just that shift of sitting at a computer, paying attention to every little cut, all of that, and then sitting back in a chair and watching on even a TV screen, to me is a big difference. It's just that feeling of, okay, this is how I would watch at home, as opposed to I'm working,
Yeah, and I like to do that process by act or reel, depending on what I'm doing. So, like, I'll divide the overall episode or whatever I'm working on into bits. And so, if I'm doing act 1, 2, and 3, like, I'll do that process every time I change to move to another act. I'll watch the act down and be like, does this whole act work? So I get a feel for the flow and where that flow needs to go next. So, yeah.
I push for the audio to get involved as much as possible. Main reason I don't do the same for color is because I don't understand color. It's so not my world. But with audio, it's great. I mean, to be able to send them a scene and have them, if nothing else, send just a library of sound effects that would work for that scene, and then in a perfect world do a quick mix of that scene or add in a sound design track. So yeah, I try to get in and I try to have contact with them, because I think I've had a couple of movies where they didn't want to pay me to be on for the mix, and I think it's as big a mistake as me not being on for the shoot, if not a bigger. I know that movie and every sound in that movie better than the director, better than anybody, and to not have the editor around for that is crazy. Again, I may feel the same way about color if that was my thing, but it's just not. So.
Yeah, I always do notes, like color timing notes and mix notes, and have those send them off. And then I've been fortunate enough to work with people who often let me come to the watch down or to the mix afterwards and point out things that aren't working or didn't happen properly. And yeah.
And with, at least for me, with documentary, and I'm sure it's similar in reality, it's so important because you have to create so much dialogue out of things that don't exist, and it may be something that was recorded horribly that you need to make sound as good as possible because your intention was to make it sound like it actually happened on the day. And so yeah, those things it's great to be involved with that. Yeah, I mean, with documentary stuff, I mean, I definitely, you can kind of always come up with something to look at if you have the audio to tell the story. And it's, I mean, you can, if you have great visuals, you can get the interviews to cover up the visuals also. So you can it kind of depends on what was shot and what's able to be shot in the future. like I did this documentary about a football player, and it was over 20 years. And the very early stuff, the visuals, there were some incredible visuals, but no audio to go along with it. And we weren't going to be able to fill that with visuals that were time appropriate, so that was going to be based around, I took the visuals and we were going to create interviews to go along with that. And then as it got more present day, we could go shoot B-roll because it's present day and it will look right. So you can have your audio bed and then create the B-roll around it. So Right. Depends on the project.
Yeah, I find myself cutting very much so around audio first, mostly because that's where I'm getting my story from. So whether it's happening in scene or coming from interview bites, I will literally restructure. I usually get a string out or something, and I will first always do a restructure based around what I need it to say. And then I'll go in and, finesse stuff from there. And unless I'm working on something that's visual, like a montage, and then I always start with music first.
And then with narrative, actually, I go both ways. If I cut a scene, I'll play back the scene and not watch and just listen. And then I'll do the opposite, where I'll turn the sound off and just watch. And you can learn a lot just about the scene if there's both sides, It's like if it's working audio-wise, okay, I should be able to make it work visually. And if it's working visually, I should be able to make it work audio-wise. But some things visually will pop out to me if I take the sound away. Cuts won't work, or something will just pop that I'll try to fix, so. In the 2 documentaries I did, there was no script whatsoever. I was handed footage, and I asked them what they wanted to move. Both of them. The first one I did, I was given 125 hours of footage, and I said, did you say how much? I thought somebody said. And I said to the director, so it was about these teenage jazz musicians. And I said, so it's the movie about them in school? Is it about the kids? Is it about jazz? And he was like, that's a great question. Well, we gotta have an answer for that. And then on the second one, there was 700 hours of footage. And they didn't have anything.
Yeah, and in reality, I don't even want to go into the hours of footage that exists in a show. But yeah, you have to start with something. I usually get an outline and then an actual string out where scenes will be slugged together in chunks and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, there's that statement of the best editing isn't noticed or whatever. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's just ridiculous. It's like I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but it's like I understand this is the film business, and it is a business, and we are all trying to sell a product, and that is the big end goal, unless you want to sit at home and watch your stuff by yourself. But at the same time, it is an art. And if it's appropriate, there's no reason why editing shouldn't be an art also. I've heard very successful big editors who think that the editing in Requiem for a Dream is terrible. I think that's some of the best editing that's ever been in a movie. That a lot of that did come from came from Darren Aronofsky. But it's there's times when it's appropriate and there's times when it's not. I think in A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, I did some very artistic editing. I felt like I can explain next to every cut in that movie, and there is a reason why I did all of it, and I think it's all very appropriate. I didn't do it to show off. I didn't know what I was doing, so I definitely didn't do it to show off. I couldn't have done anything different. But in the following movies, that stuff it doesn't make sense for the movie. It's all individual. I think for me personally, in my first pass, I do whatever I think is best, whether it's very straight and forward or if it's as creative and out there I do what I think should be there, and then you go from there. There was only once one of the producers at one point thought there was too much music, but we ended up cutting back a bunch of the music because it didn't make sense when you watch the whole movie. But it was there was everybody involved wanted it to be it was an art film. I mean, and that's so.
Yeah, I think POV is one of the most important things that you bring as an editor. That's like what distinguishes editors from each other is your POV. And I'm very upfront usually when I'm interviewing for a job. Then like I'm story first. Like you want flashy like effects and tons of polish. Like that's not me. So when in story first for me, I also have a particular POV. I mean, POV is usually a lot about heart and like character and personality. So those are the things I'm really looking for. And I usually get hired because that's what people want me to bring to a project. And so, having a take helps me from the very get shape anything. And there's always going to be people that disagree with my choices at some point, but then that becomes conversations. But yeah, I've actually had showrunners tell me, like, complain about other editors who didn't have a take, and going like, you have to at least have a take. I don't have to agree with it, but you have to have a take. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, what I always say when I'm meeting people is I'm all about performance. Performance first to me. It's like if the performance doesn't work, then I don't believe the character, then I don't care what they're saying, then I don't care what the story is. And so I'm all about, I cut for performance to start. It's whatever the best performance is, and then if it's not feeling right, then we go back and then we start making things. You can make the story work, you can make I'll cut out lines if I don't feel like anybody's delivering them right. It's about, to me, for the movies that I've worked on, it's if you don't connect with the characters, if you don't feel like they're real, then so much gets lost.
Specific examples. I mean, in reality all the time, there's stuff that just, it's like, there's such ambitious visions for what should happen, and they always revolve around conflict. Like, we need a fight. It's like, that's great, except for your two characters are sitting on a couch talking in soft voices. Like, you want me to turn this into a fight? So, so yeah, I've done things like literally pulled a fight that happened in a car where their mics were still on but the cameras weren't on them, and put it on a shot of a door in the apartment. So you get the characters to go into that room, and then you just audio lift it, and they're having that fight behind the door, So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that goes on. Even we needed a conversation, like a phone call between a couple to be about something. They were talking, they said only half of what needed to be said in the conversation, so we literally lifted the rest of what needed to be said from their interview bites, and I would cut to reaction shots of the other person on the phone listening as the person would say the words we needed them to say. So, yeah, that stuff happens all the time.
I'm trying to think of a time where a scene wasn't working and I tried something different. I've definitely had times where transitions between scenes weren't working and trying to come up with something to go in between them, and looking before action, after cut, and finding those shots of somebody sitting somewhere doing nothing just to check in on characters. Actually, in A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, there's a scene where the song Trouble by Cat Stevens plays, and we check in with all the characters. That wasn't in the script. We hit a roadblock where getting from one place to the next wasn't working. We had a shot of a guy going on and putting on a radio, and we had him press play, turn that song on, and then we check in with all of our characters. And it was like, the amount of comments and feedback we've gotten on that scene in particular are just ridiculous. But that was never in the script, and it was just something that needed to happen.
For me, a lot of my decision in taking a job is the person hiring me. And so when I've had a great working experience with somebody, that always factors into like wanting to work with them again and whether or not I'm going to do the next project. So I love the relationship aspect. Most of my work has actually come from, referrals of people I've worked with repeatedly or working with them over and over again. So it's great because people you get to develop a shorthand that I think is really important that helps us save time, because a lot of the frustration in the collaboration process is communication and learning how to really communicate two different visions, and people have different ways of like getting a vision out into a material form. And so when you learn people's quirks about like how they do that, like I only do like little paper notes about this, or I like to actually get in a timeline and put together things and show it to you, or you develop these little ways of working together and communicating that I think help speed up things and get you a better product in the end. So yeah, I'm a big fan of building on collaborations over time.
And obviously financially working with directors over and over again is nice, because then you just have that many more people that are going to hire you. But one director that I'm working with right now, this is our 5th movie together, and it's great. It's getting that shorthand and not having that learning curve at the beginning is nice, for one. But also just, I think the involvement as an editor that you get when you've worked with that director over and over again gets larger and larger. I mean, they're more likely to involve you in a lot of the decisions and a lot of the creative process from an earlier point. If that means they trust you, that means they want to work with you, that means they're looking forward to what you're bringing to the table. And, there are times where a job where you don't want to think that much, and working with somebody who's going to tell you exactly what to do might sound nice, but on a feature length, that's not quite so fun. So I think it's great to keep working with somebody. It's yeah, I think it's great. No, it's definitely not as opposed to challenge, because I think it's exciting to work with somebody new, but unless I don't have a good experience with them, I'd rather keep working with them than just not work with them again. I mean, if it's, and there is I don't know if it's from where it comes from, but there is a bit of a loyalty aspect to it. If I have 2 movies coming up, and one's with a director I've worked with before, and one's with somebody I haven't worked with before, if that experience on the first movie with that director went well, I'm going to do that second movie with them before I jump onto something. I mean, it depends on the relationship with the director. It depends on the script. It depends on the financial situation at the time. I mean, it kind of can go either way depending on the projects. I've done 2 documentaries. On both of them, they had no real idea of where they were going, so we wrote the movie in editing on both of them. Yeah, so for me, no. I mean, but I do know other documentary filmmakers where they shoot their footage, the directors or people that they work with will go through all the footage, they will transcribe it, they will write out a full script, and the editor gets a script. Obviously, then, like any scripted movie, it will change in editing, but they have a real direction of where they're going. But on the 2 that I've worked on, I was just handed footage. And
yeah, no, I mean, mine is mostly reality experience, and so it's been both, but more often than not, it's scripted-esque. It's at least interviews are transcribed, so you can flip through them. And there is a log of everything that's been done, shot, kind of thing like that. So there's not like a script per se, but there's a lot of organization that's been done so that I can find things. And then there's definitely an idea. Everyone's always come with like, this is how it should go. Never really works that way, but there's always a jumping off point. So I'll wrap it up real quick. We did touch on that really quickly at the beginning. It's fine. I cut on Final Cut Pro 7 for a lot. I recently went back to Avid because that's what they're using, in production companies more that were using Final Cut are switching back to Avid because of Final Cut 10, and how that's not a professional tool yet. But I was saying it's good to be multilingual these days, and I'm actually learning Premiere's system now. I really like where Adobe's going as well. So, all three platforms I think are really good to know.
If it was up to me, I would only do Avid and get rid of all that other stuff.
I actually did. I boycotted it for a year, and then earlier this year, I finally decided to give it a chance, and now I love it. Actually, I use it specifically for cheap, shoddy web videos, but but I can get those done in half the time I would in any other platform, so it works for what they need it to work for. Yeah. And I guess advice, I would say, stay up on the tools and the skills, like more consistent use and practice and trying new things and getting a feel for your own style and getting inspired by other, editors and filmmakers, always a good thing.
Yeah, and put yourself out there and do as much work as you can with other people, because that's the way you'll meet more people who are doing more things. Thank you.
Thank you.